Coming up in This Week in Computer Hardware, AMD rumors, GTA 5 performance tweaks, Windows updates from Microsoft Build, more love for more memory, and how's that Apple Watch working out? It's all coming up next on Twitch.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twitch.
Bandwidth for Twitch is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 313, recorded 4/30/2015. Microsoft Build and AMD leaks.
This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by ProFlowers. Mother's Day is May 10th, and ProFlowers has got you covered. Get 1 dozen rainbow roses in a free glass vase for just $19.99 plus shipping. Visit proflowers.com, click the microphone in the top right corner, and enter code TWIT. And by Braintree. If you're working on a mobile app and searching for the right payments API, check out the Braintree V.0 SDK. With one simple integration, you get every way to pay. To learn more and to try out the sandbox, go to braintreepayments.com/Twitch.
The Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, Twitch weekly show that aims to bring you the most useful, most informative, most helpful, most delightful, and yes, ladies and gentlemen, if you're into social networking, most engaging content of the hardware hardware-y variety. It is going to be a crazy spread of stuff we talk about today. Microsoft Build took place this week. I'm like 45, well, actually an hour and 15 minutes away from getting stuffed into a HoloLens system. The Apple Watch arrived yesterday. ARM's dropping new architecture details. So we should probably just, and memory. By the way, memory. The more memory I put in my system, the happier I am. I've just realized that.
I'm curious, how many people do you think, if we were to put a bet on it now, could I text and have walk behind you and make a face while we're recording the show?
Well, we're looking mostly, I think at this point,
in there now? I guess I should point out for people who just listen to the audio, you are at the convention center, right? In San Francisco. And so I recognize it just merely by the walls behind him. I know he's in the press room there. I probably know a handful of people there that I could text and say, hey, go up to the press room, walk behind Patrick, and kind of...
You should give it a shot. I mean, at this point, there's not counting Microsoft PR staffers, there's about 32 people in here. The 2 exhausted-looking men from China have finally woken up and stumbled out, probably to catch a horrible overnight flight across the Pacific. But yeah, it's a Microsoft Build. You know, we talk about Intel Developer Forum. Obviously, it's Intel's like, hey, this is what we're going to do in the world, right? And Apple has a developer forum, and Microsoft has a developer forum called Build. And the idea for all of these, Google has their own version of it. The idea for all these huge gatherings of people that make code is I think everybody who's listening to the podcast knows that your, Core i7 system with 64 gigabytes of RAM, and if you're Malventano, triple SS rated 1 terabyte SSDs because you are a ninja and you will have all the speed. It's a brick until you're actually running software on it, right? An operating system is the foundation, and I'll just call the software as the building, the infrastructure, the people, the awesomeness, right? I mean, don't get me wrong. If I wipe everything off of this, Dell XPS 13 and run it, it's still going to be awesome. It's just going to be a freaking doorstop. So Build, in this case, Microsoft, is where Microsoft targets developers for their big honkin' movements. And the first 2/3 of the primary keynote was primarily around, Azure, their new SQL database system. Azure, of course, is their cloud computing system that developers can tap into. And they're like, okay, we're in we got 19 major centers, over 1 million, boxes on tap. And the idea is, as you've heard, Google obviously gives people access to servers. Amazon has their cloud systems, their back-end systems. And one of the big things they started out was a demo by a company called Docker. And if you don't code, you probably don't know about Docker. Docker started out with Linux systems and essentially allowing you to take the application you need, all the dependencies, and bundle them into one thing. that you could post onto a server. Super easy, super simple. It's kind of it has a communal aspect in the sense that people commit code to it and make these applications available. So one of the big things with Docker's like, yeah, we're meeting with Microsoft. We thought they wanted us to do this or that, and we were kind of excited to be meeting. And then Microsoft's like, yes, we want you to support everything Windows Server. And they were like, and if you can't, if you're listening and not watching, you just saw me made the big open face of surprise, because Docker's like, okay, we can now make it super easy to take, if you want to use a Windows Server front end and a Linux back end, and get crazy. It's pretty, it's getting, I'm not going to say easy, but it's getting a lot easier to do that. So, and then of course Azure, and a lot of what they're talking about doing with Azure is bringing in different modules to make it easy to go, okay, I've got this giant database in, this SQL, server over here, and I want to put these processes on it, and stuff comes out the other end. And, when I was talking on Tech Thing about this yesterday, the episode 17 that just went up today, techthing.com, youtube.com/techthing, get my Dvorak on there for a moment. The thing that was interesting about it is I joked, I said, look, I'm not going to try to get too deep into this, because anybody who actually programs for a living will start laughing so hard they might put themselves into a hospital, and B, there's some, there's the sort of the reality of the situation, or the sort of goal of the situation, the marketing spin on the situation, and then the reality of actually using it. So they had a lot of people up there that were like, hey, Microsoft's, they're opening up their platforms, they're making it easier. And a big part of that was a new version of Visual Studio. And let me pull this up so I get the name right. But essentially, what was kind of really interesting about that, as I managed to erase my Google search, what was kind of blowing people's minds is these new programming tools that Microsoft is putting out, this, sort of advanced programming or intelligent programming environment, is that you can run it on Windows, you can run it on Linux, you can run it on OS X. Visual Studio Code. So it's literally a free cross-platform code editor for OS X, Linux, and Windows. And what was really interesting about that is, one, it's a really neat piece of code, and two, they're trying to make it super easy for people to take their existing code base, whether it is Objective-C for iOS applications, or any of the millions of Windows 32 apps or .NET apps that are still out there, or, regular C, or I could list things and turn this into a sort of buzzword bingo of development environments. But they're like, hey, Photoshop Elements, Win32, one of the best Win32 apps made. And they ran it through our system, tells them where the glitches are, you work through that. And now, Photoshop Elements is in the store, the Windows Store. So reasons that it is important to be in the Windows Store is our friends at Microsoft are trying to do something that sounds a lot like Java in 1995, hopefully with more success than Java in 1995. The idea that there is literally one Windows. They have this big slide that comes up, that has everything from, a Windows, a Raspberry Pi, and something Satya said several times, the CEO in the keynote, is like, we want the experience, the Windows 10 experience, to be portable, and that is more important than actually how mobile the device is, right? So whether it's, Internet of Things kind of Windows release that's out for the Raspberry Pi, which I'm still trying to download right now, so I can get my Internet of Things on the Raspberry Pi and yet another operating system, or a Windows Phone, or a tablet, or a laptop, or a desktop, or a home theater, a big screen, lean back environment, or the HoloLens, which I'll be getting my grubby little mitts on in an hour or two, that the key elements are there. And one of the things that really came out to me in the process of this 3-hour keynote, this unbelievably long keynote, was that Microsoft, kind of a re-emphasizing for developers of what Microsoft did for consumers back 100 days ago, 102 days ago when they announced, HoloLens and Windows 10 Technical Preview, is that their goal, or Windows, they started, getting serious about Windows 10, was that their goal is to listen to their customer base rather than trying to force the customer base to move. So, it's little things like, hey, the start menu's back, and, the Windows 10 Technical Preview start menu now not only has your applications, but something we know from the interface formerly known as Metro, which is, live tiles on the side of that you can configure. Cortana's now been integrated into Windows 10 and Windows Phone. And one of the demos, it's funny, I didn't talk about this on Tech Thing because I was, trying to cram a 3-hour keynote into like 4 minutes. But one of the demos they did actually allowed you to, okay, so it's pretty simple to say Cortana, yes, and watch, it's going to start doing horrible things to my system, and I'll probably drop out of the podcast, but, Cortana, launch Viber, right? So Viber's a visual chat system. And then the thing he did was really cool is, Cortana, launch Viber, tell Bob, I'm going to be late for our meeting. And then Cortana's like, tell Bob, I'm going to be late for the meeting. Is that correct? Yes. And of course, he had to say yes a couple different ways, a couple times. And once he did that, Viber basically launched a connection and told Bob that he's going to be late. Bob not being the right name, but Bob's kind of a MacGuffin, doesn't really matter. So the idea that there's some intelligence behind this system, whether this is running on your system or in Microsoft's cloud or Azure or whatever you want to call it, doesn't really matter. So the idea is, so Microsoft is making it easier to bring anything coded on just about any environment into Windows with their new free Visual Studio Code editor. They're certainly targeting iOS developers by making it easier to take Objective-C in at one end. And they're trying to make the environment, the experience more consistent, which I thought was pretty interesting. It was, I'm a big fan of Windows 10 and becoming a bigger fan. I had my problem about 2 weeks ago when Windows 10 was causing my system to lock up and forced me to reboot it every 10 minutes for about a week. My understatement on that, making Snubs laugh really hard on the podcast, because it started doing that about 4 minutes into an episode we were recording. But yeah, the idea that Cortana can execute in-app commands, which actually makes verbal computing a little more useful. As you mentioned, I think before the podcast, Project Spartan is now known as Microsoft Edge because it's the edge in between consuming content and creating content, where I think creating content is, using their note-taking system and the ability to, scribble on the page. We still don't have a launch date for Windows 10. Should be sometime this summer. Late last night, they released the Raspberry Pi version of Windows, which is kind of an Internet of Things, not a desktop version of Windows 10. Continuum's pretty cool. So if you're like running a Windows Phone or a Windows tablet, if you plug a keyboard and a mouse into it, it's going to do things like display Excel, for example, in a way that's much more appropriate to actually do work than, say, trying to, work with that little screen on your phone. So they're really trying to make Microsoft Windows as usable as possible, as easy as possible. They also emphasize that, hey, we're moving away from the sort of monolithic purchase. The Verge had an interesting article that suggested one of the reasons they're going to be able to do this for free is because they might be putting in ads into the new lock screen. The lock screen is going to, give you information, updates. It's kind of funny to watch, if all of this works the way it's supposed to work. It should kind of bring to life a lot of ideas that we've been watching and playing around with in theory, for what feels like decades now, in terms of, being able to, work with your computer in ways other than, typing on a keyboard, manipulating with a mouse. I mean, I think we were sitting at, CES maybe 2012, when there was the big push from Intel, like, we have all of this processor power, so touchscreens are going to be part of the Ultrabook platform, and we're going to do verbal computing, and there's going to be gestures, and most of this stuff didn't really happen in any meaningful way. I mean, I've got a touchscreen laptop, but, how often do I actually use the touchscreen? So... man, what else? They had an interesting integration between I want to say a B-15, which is a small robot powered by a Raspberry Pi in the keynotes. And they brought that in with the HoloLens so that you could manipulate and control the HoloLens, use the HoloLens to manipulate and control the robot. So you could reach out and point here and have the robot navigate to those spots instead of having to deal with a complicated interface to program the robot. And also, when you put the HoloLens on, it created this sort of 3D, space age, 50s kind of space age looking robot that would hover over the virtual spot. And they showed, the big HoloLens is going to change the way we deal with computing because, when you put your HoloLens on, again, it's the idea that they're going to overlay information. So if you look over here, you see the weather, in Maui. So because you're excited about your vacation in Maui, and you can look over there and see, your entertainment playing or something going on the screen. And you look over there and, you see a virtual reminder to feed the cat. So, yeah, I think I've covered the bulk of what was going on.
Try that out. That's when they first announced it, I thought it was utter nonsense. Now it appears to not be the case. So
well, they don't have a release date for HoloLens, although apparently they had several hundred units here for developers to get hands-on experience with. They were running classes on how to code for HoloLens. They released the Raspberry Pi version of Windows 10 last night. And I guess it's also running on Arduino. So it's obviously going to be a very stripped down, it's the Internet of Things core. I think they're calling it the Windows 10 Internet of Things core. So, windowsondevices.com to learn more about that. Yeah, it's been interesting.
It sounds like more information came out of that show than I expected there to be, honestly. So
way more than I had expected. I'm very, very glad I went there. The other thing that showed up this week is a friend of mine who's a developer hooked me up with one of the developer editions of the Apple Watch. And, I don't wear watches in part because I type for a living, and I cannot seem to wear a watch of any size for any length of time without it making my wrists ache. And, the Apple Watch is no exception, and it doesn't actually help. Apparently, there's one band that's 5 millimeters larger than the sport band, but I don't know if you can see that for the people watching at home, but, my wrists are pretty big. This is a 210 millimeter band, the medium large band, all the way out at the last dot. And it's still a little, difficult. So, my wrists are just, I guess I'm at the far end of the bell curve for wrist sizes. I will say, as you would expect from an Apple device, the fit and finish are utterly gorgeous. It's fairly big and heavy. Everybody's seen the sensors on the back. The screen is gorgeous. The interface, they certainly work to develop a very distinctive interface. And I have to say, it is one of the, it reminds me of using sort of vintage hardware in the sense of, there's some very distinct and strange and wonderful manipulations you have to go through, or processes you have to go through to do anything with it. So I'm in the process of learning those, which is, I have this shiny thing on my wrist, and the children are like, "That's amazing! What can it do?" And I'm like,
When kids find out they have a watch that when they touch the face of it, it starts to do things. It's you're holding them and they're just reaching over, they're trying to touch your phone. Like, no, please stop. Don't. No, you're gonna.
Well, that's why I put the lock code on it immediately during the startup phase. The battery life. I'm hoping I didn't start the day with a full battery, because if I started today with a full battery, I'd arrived very, very late yesterday. If I started today with a full battery and I managed to tap it out by like 3 o'clock this afternoon, that's going to be a pretty miserable battery life story. But I don't think it was charged completely. And of course, I'm pretty sure I'm doing everything in the least efficient way possible. But it's got dark sky on it, which is my favorite weather application. And that alone almost might make it worth the trauma of learning the interface. And I got to say, making phone calls through it works much, much better than I expected it to. Obviously, it's got to be linked to an iPhone. The iPhone's got to be in range. It's fundamentally, a sort of Fitbit tracking. It's a very sophisticated Fitbit tracking watch, game player. Although it'd be interesting. I haven't tested to see if the games will work if the phone's off, but it's going to be interesting. I'll have a more intelligent and detailed review of it by next week. But yeah, it is very much a first edition piece of hardware, and it's a very, very interesting interface to start experimenting with. And like everything Apple, it is really, the fit and finish is absolutely gorgeous. And screen replacement, the folks at iFixit have discovered, not that you can get a screen, looks like it won't be nearly as miserable as I thought it might be. They've essentially, you can pop the screen off if you're profoundly patient. And, so far I've gone the better part of 24 hours without breaking a screen, which is, I understand there's a pool of Tech Thing viewers that are now trying to figure out when I'm going to trash the screen for the first time.
It'd be a good bet to get in on, I bet. I would think. Yeah. Well,
I wait with bated breath.
So eager to see, as the weeks go on, we'll surely have updates on your experiences with that, with the watch, and not just review, but actual hey, what'd you do this week type of stuff. Let's go ahead. I guess we'll get into some of the other stories that happened this week. Some of these need less discussion than others. The ARM released details of the Cortex A72 processor. This is a next year part from ARM. This is gonna not anything you're gonna see this year, and probably at least middle of next year. So we're talking about a full calendar year before this is released. This is kind of how ARM traditionally releases their architectures. Right. They did an announcement. I think it was at CES in January, just very high level. Now they went a little bit more into what they expect performance-wise, what they will be able to get power efficiency-wise. And this actually looks pretty impressive due to a combination of some fundamentally very important changes and evolutions to the core design that was of the A57 that we're just now starting to see in some of the higher end Qualcomm parts, some of the higher end Samsung parts, the 64-bit processors that are shipping in, say, like the S6 or the Note 4, or like the new LG G4, for example.
Right.
Also, these are going to be manufactured on 16 nanometer FinFET process technology, as opposed to where they're at now. A57s on 28 or 20. I think the most recent ones are now at 20 nanometer. And the FinFET, the lower process technology, trying to get in there and compete with Intel on their 14 nanometer process, is going to result in much less power consumption at the same performance levels, or being able to get significantly higher performance at the same power consumption levels, right? So that's typically the trade-off, but you can see even those numbers there listing at, going from a 28 nanometer part to a 16 nanometer part, you're looking at 75% less energy at target process, right? So that's a significant drop in power consumption for these parts. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to get 75% more battery life out of a phone that uses it. That's only one component of many that goes into the total power draw of a system. But obviously, this is something that's going to help with those facets moving forward. Now, I don't think on this show we really want to dive into, how the prefetch has changed, how the memory dispatch has changed, or anything like that. But if you were interested in those types of architectural details, Josh did a good job on the write-up of those. So if you go to pcper.com and look at that story, you can get all of those kinds of nitty-gritty details if you want them. But the only other thing I will say on A72 really is that people I have been talking to over the last 60 days that have been learning more and more about this core, that don't work for ARM, that are either other people in the analyst industry or partners, seem to be very impressed with what A72 will do, both in the mobile space for like your high-end smartphones, as well as in the server infrastructure world, where they're still making inroads for those subsets of workloads that do better with high quantity ARM cores, as opposed to super high IPC Intel cores that traditionally use. So that could be an interesting thing to watch. It's a early to mid 2016.
Yeah, I mean, if they're talking about the kind of performance increase they're showing in these slides in the same power envelope, that's going to be pretty badass to look at, and that's without a die shrink. So, another Josh Walworth article up there. AMD Zen diagram leaked, and analysis There are a few things. We know for sure about Zen. Clean sheet design moves away from what AMD was pursuing with their Bulldozer family of cores, which, if you're asking me, is probably a good thing. Zen gives up CMT for SMT support for handling more threads. Design has a cluster of 4 cores sharing 8 megabytes of L3 cache, with each core having access to 512 kilobytes of L2 cache. And I'm quoting Josh straight here. There's a lot of optimism that AMD can kick the trend of falling more and more behind Intel every year with this particular design. Jim Keller is viewed very positively due to his work at AMD on the K7 through K8 days, as well as what he's accomplished at Apple with their ARM-based offerings. And that's a pretty serious pedigree in terms of being a chip designer.
The Zen architecture is something we have heard about for a while. This was like, Keller comes back, he says this is what we're working on. A lot of people have been looking forward to this as kind of, this will finally get AMD back on path to compete with Intel. And obviously we don't, from these leaked slides, we really can't tell anything specific like that. They don't mention clock speeds or throughput rates or anything. But I will say, you know, depending on, this is listed as a 2016 part, depending on how late in 2016 it, you know, the later you go, the more problems you're going to have, the more Intel's going to do to improve its own position, and also the less financially stable AMD as a company is going to be, So we want this part as soon as we can get it. I'm sure AMD wants this part as soon as they can get it too. But it has some fundamental architecture changes that, I mean, it's not an evolution of Bulldozer or Excavator. It is a ground up restart core design. Much like we saw going from K6 to K7, like the original Athlon days. That doesn't guarantee that we're going to have the same success that we saw with the Athlon processors way back when. Man, when was that? 2002? No, 9, something like that. But it starts to give us some positive vibes, I guess, from AMD and the CPU division, something we haven't had a lot recently. So. I'm trying to see if there's anything else on these slides that stands out. I talk about up to 8 cores with 16 threads, up to 8 megs of L3 cache per quad core unit. They no longer have the shared resource concerns that Bulldozer had, where integer math was done on separate, but the floating point math was shared, but yet they still called them 2 cores. We don't have any of that kind of debate this time. You're just using traditional multi-threading SMT process, I guess, there. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much where we're at now in terms of what we know about it. But Josh seems fairly positive on it in terms of what it could be. Now we just don't have the same amount of, like we just talked about the A72 core for ARM. We have a lot more information about what changes were made there and what frequencies to expect than we have with Zen. So whether or not that'll be something that AMD kind of, this leaked from a presentation that will apparently be given on May 6th, which is the Hot Chips. Is that what that is? I think that's one of those conferences like that where they go deep into that type of stuff. So we may know more then, say early next month. So maybe by the next episode, we'll know something else. Or maybe all that's going to be talked about is what leaked out anyway. So we'll see.
You got to start somewhere. One last thing while we're talking about AMD before we take a moment to thank our first sponsor this episode. Sebastian Peak wrote this up at PCPro.com. A rumor, could AMD and PC Gamer event at E3 finally, I'm bringing the fist of joy here, bring new GPU announcements. You know, the fact that rumor is the first word in this title should give you an idea that this is very speculative. You know, AMD Fiji GPU rumors are nothing new to followers of industry news, writes Sebastian, but it has now been indirectly announced that the upcoming Fiji GPU from AMD will in fact feature 2.5D high bandwidth memory. Did we say the consonants were optional this episode? As reported by tech news rumor site WCCF Tech, the announcement came via the official schedule for the upcoming Hot Chip Symposium, which is slated for August 23rd to 25th in Cupertino, California. And, you know, there's a big old screenshot there. Fiji, the world's first graphics processor with 2.5D high bandwidth memory. Joe Mockery, Raja Kaduri, Mike Mentor, and Brian Black from AMD. Followed by the ARM Mali T8080 mobile GPU by Ian Bratt at ARM. And then lunch. It sounds like a wonderful morning for AMD. So until August, August, we wait.
I'm curious. So. Like the E3 announcement is interesting. Like it says it's like presented by AMD, but it's kind of hosted by PC Gamer. Is it an actual AMD event, or is it, you know, like kind of like an industry event and AMD is the title sponsor? Really don't know a whole lot about that, but I'm glad to see. I hope something good comes of it, because I want PC gaming to get maybe a little bit more emphasis at E3 this year if it can.
Well, you and I will always emphasize the PC gaming, because that, ladies and gentlemen, is the way we roll. Many of you out there are parents. My partner in crime, Ryan Shrout, soon to become a father. His wife is about to become a mother. Everything goes well. That's what we're hoping for. I have 2 children. I have a mother. Many of you out there have mothers, or are married or not married anymore to people who are the mothers of their children. And we want to remind you that Mother's Day is coming up Sunday, May 10th. We're recording this April 30th, the last day in April. It is a mere 10 days probably by the time you get this podcast or this video, that Mother's Day will leap upon you, not with bated breath, but with hot steaming breath of rage and anger, should you forget the mothers in your life. So, if, you know, Ryan's wife is pregnant. Pregnancy is kind of a 9-month just excuse for just suffering. Some people, you know, talking about the experience being joyful. Not many of the actual mothers I know in real life, but my wife, of course, is the mother of my children, which is a joy and punishment all of its own. If any of you know me personally, you know probably why that is. But you got to remember to appreciate your mom this Mother's Day. It doesn't have to be stressful. Our sponsor at Pro Flowers makes buying a beautiful gift for mom simple and quick. They've got everything you need for Mother's Day for all the moms in your life. You choose a delivery date you want, and it is guaranteed. And best of all, their flowers are guaranteed to be fresh and beautiful for at least 7 days after you receive them, because there's nothing worse than sending mom dead flowers, unless she's a Rolling Stones fan. The website's easy to use. It's pretty cool. Just scroll through the website, look for the bouquet that you think is going to make mom delighted. They start at just $19.99 plus shipping. They've got flowers for all occasions, not just Mother's Day. Roses, daisies, tulips, orchids, lilies, quite a bit more. And every order comes with a Pro Flowers guarantee. So do us a favor. Help us out here at the show by going for Mother's Day to Pro Flowers, because they get a special offer for fans of TWiCH. You get a dozen rainbow roses in a free glass vase for only $19.99 plus shipping. Or if you want to really go over the top, 2 dozen roses in a free glass vase for just $9.99 more. So for 50% more, you get 200% roses, which sounds to me like a deal if you're into the rose lifestyle. So visit proflowers.com today. Click the blue microphone on the top right corner and do yourself and us a favor and be sure to enter in the code TWiT. You only have until Friday, May 8th to take advantage of this special offer, because they got to ship them to you, and that does still take time, no matter what Amazon might have you thinking. And if you order by then, you can still get guaranteed delivery for Mother's Day. That's proflowers.com, and do yourself a favor and take care of us by using the code TWiT. That's TWIT. We want to thank Pro Flowers for their support, and on behalf of TWiT to all the mothers out there, happy Mother's Day. Oh my goodness.
Good
Mother's
job.
Day. Mother's Day, Mother's Day, Mother's Day. Get your mom. Get your mom a new GPU.
Say, the last thing I'll say about that is don't put it off. You can do this already. Like, I went in and I scheduled deliveries for my wife and my mother, and I did this, you know, when we found out that Pro Flowers was going to be a sponsor. I was like, okay, let's go try this service out, and scheduled it ahead of time so that I knew I would not forget, and I didn't have to do it the day before. And it's always good to be prepared that way.
You know, it's just, don't upset mom. Do yourself a favor. Listen to Ryan and I. We are men of experience. Don't upset your mother. Mr. Ryan Shrout, you wrote up, I actually should say you performed, you displayed, you did a video on installing Windows on the Intel SSD 750 series. What we are now referring to, I think, internally as the badass super drive from Intel. I think that's the internal name of reference, judging from the amount of drool that comes out of that one corner of Alan's mouth when he talks about this drive. Was it easy? Is NVMe a delight? Did you even notice that you were installing it on an NVMe drive, or did you spend a lot of time tweaking the BIOS and hammering your head against the nearest table?
So I think it was 2 weeks ago or something. I posted a different story that was like, hey, let's look at the compatibility of the SSD 750 across from different products. So once you kind of get that out of the air, right? So Intel kind of only officially supports Z97 and X99 platforms. And then you need to make sure your motherboard has the most recent BIOS or UEFI to support NVMe devices. Once you have that, the installation of an operating system to it, like if you buy a 400 gig or a 1.2 terabyte Intel SSD 750, you install it in your system and you just want to, run, is really pretty straightforward. And for Asus, BIOS, for Asus motherboards specifically, you don't have to enable NVMe. It kind of just shows up as a bootable device. The one thing you kind of have to make sure is enabled is that UEFI boot is enabled and not just legacy boot. In all of the cases we've run across, it is defaulting to UEFI and legacy, so it will see everything. But if it's maybe something you had changed in the past, you have to enable the UEFI boot part, and that will, that will be the same across all platforms. But once you do that, if you're installing Windows 8.1 off of a CD-ROM or off of a DVD or off of a USB drive, then when you come up to when you get the prompt about, hey, which drive do you want to install to, you will see the Intel SSD 750 there, and that you hit yes, I want to install to that drive, and boom, you're done. It's really just as simple as if you had kind of your traditional SATA SSD hooked up to a controller. If you install Windows 7 or Windows 8.0, which you should not install Windows 8.0 at this point. You should either have 7 or 8.1, and really you should have 8.1. But if you're one of those guys that's holding on to Windows 7, you can still install it to that. You just have to load the driver during that setup process. So right when it brings up the screen of, well, which drives are available, it won't show anything. You click have disk, give it the file that you've downloaded from Intel's website, and it will then load that driver, see the drive, and you go through installation. And then you install Windows as you normally would. It installs exceptionally quickly. So if you're trying to time it, it's going to be way faster than if the last time you've installed Windows 8.1 was on, say, a 2 terabyte hard drive. It's going to be a very different experience than when you install it onto an SSD 750. When you get into Windows, you should go to Intel's driver site and download their latest software there and install that. It's not necessary for functionality, but it will get you the best possible performance out of the drive itself. So it just kind of tweaks the NVMe settings. It recognizes everything correctly. It adjusts QDEPs accordingly, and boom, you're off and running. But it's really quite easy to get up and running, because I know when we say, hey, there's this PCI Express SSD and it uses a new protocol called NVMe. It can seem a little daunting. Maybe it's like, I don't want to deal with that. I'll just make it a secondary drive. Maybe I'll still install to my SATA disk or to this hard drive or something like that. And you don't have to do that. If the BIOS sees the SSD, boom, you're ready to roll, right? And Windows 10 has support for it as well out of the box, just like Windows 8.1 does. So it's a very easy process, and that is, to be honest with you, that is why it took as long for us to get a consumer variant of an NVMe SSD as it did. The P3700, which was Intel's enterprise version of this drive, came out a year ago, I think a full year ago, almost exactly. But they weren't trying to boot off of those. They were trying to use them as scratch disks and that type of stuff for incredibly fast data access. The biggest hurdle was making sure they could get enough motherboards and enough BIOS and enough motherboard manufacturers updated and ready and prepared to really start rolling this out. So, all future platforms that you see, definitely from Intel and probably even from AMD, realistically, will support NVMe boot. So that'll be both in desktops and laptops, because we're starting to see NVMe drives come out in M.2 form factors as well. So there's a lot to like about it. If you're worried about buying this and installing to it, short, very story tutorial that has, I think it has 4 steps, but some of those smart aleck stories where the last step is like, and you're all done. So it's really like 3 steps to get it going, and it's really no different than installing to a regular SSD. So good news there.
That's a good thing. Good article up on hardwarecp.com. Grand Theft Auto 5 PC performance. They did single GPU performance review up in the Hardware CP. Kyle and the crew. Brent Justice wrote this up for them. Quote, this is part 1 of our full evaluation of Grand Theft Auto 5's video card gaming performance. They looked at single GPU performance on 8 video cards at 1080p and 1440p. And then they get into what settings are actually playable, architectural performance differences, and what settings have the biggest impact on your gaming performance. If you are a GTA 5 kind of gal or guy, this is definitely worth reading. Unless, of course, you're already running triple SLI GPUs and you don't care because you have all of the GPU computing power. Texture quality, shadow quality, reflection quality, water quality, particles quality, soft shadows, post effects, ambient occlusion, depth of field, tessellation, And of course, no particularly huge surprise. The GTX 980 is the fastest video card with the 970 following, then the R9 290X, which is slightly slower than the GTX 970, and the R9 290 is the slowest by a large margin compared to the NVIDIA GPUs, which isn't particularly surprising given the price delta between all those cards. It's interesting. One of the things I note, quote, in the lower frames per second parts where you want better performance, the difference isn't as great, but it is most definitely still there. And these low frames per second zones is where we must make sure this actually runs in the playable performance range. This is a really, really interesting read and a really, really useful collection of information, because I know, whenever you open up a new game and you start tweaking settings, unless you are the super GPU meister, I'm looking at you, or at least at a camera that theoretically is connected somewhere in your direction, Ryan, because technically I think I'm actually facing west and you are approximately 2,700 miles behind me. I'm
just looking straight at the back of your head. It's fine.
It's good, man. It's the miracle of technology in action. But it's interesting because they also, if you're on the fence on, should I buy GTA 5 first or a new GPU, they also took a look at the GTX 780 Kepler and the Radeon R9 280X video cards, just to see whether or not the older architectures can actually, hang with Grand Theft Auto 5, which is really kind of pushing, I think, the boundaries.
Definitely. Have you seen it running on the PC really at all?
For like 60 seconds.
It is just
gorgeous.
Impressive. Oh yeah. Man. Yeah, it really, really is. It's so like these frame rates when you see a GTX 980 pull barely able to hit like 50 frames per second. This is not a game where it's like, they don't know how to optimize it. It shouldn't run at that. And this is, I think, completely valid hard testing for GPUs going forward. I see this finding its way into our testing suite very soon as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. That reminds me, there's a couple of posts that came up yesterday. I apologize. I should have dropped these into the rundown. Is rumors are on a GTX 980 Ti update. One of the sort of the title that reveals the whole story, which is up on vcpost.com. It's not one of my normal sources of tech news, but NVIDIA plays it safe with keeping release plans under wraps until AMD's Computex reveal. Graphics card specs are confirmed. So the official announcement looks like it's not going to come until September, unless, of course, I'm looking at a 2-year-old article by accident, but I don't think I am. Doubtful. Yeah. That's I love those moments when you realize there's absolutely no way to determine what date an article was posted.
Yeah.
There it is, April 30th, 6:27 a.m. So that's pretty fresh.
Pretty good news.
Yeah. September GTX 980 Ti launch. Quote, not really clear why NVIDIA is employing such a tactic when the GTX 980 Ti has a decent set of specs. Initial performance looks pretty good. So, oh my goodness. Let's just not even get into the GTX 980 Ti specs, because you know what? We got months to build up to that one. Man, what's going on with the Square Enix? I have not seen it, but apparently somewhere here at Build, they've got a DX12 demo that the NVIDIA blog, which is,
I think it was
hyperbolic.
Yeah, I think it was shown at today's keynote. So today is day 2 of Build. Is that right? I think.
Yes.
I think it was showed at this morning's keynote where they were talking about DirectX 12 and what developers were going to be able to do with that. And Square Enix, Square, known for their extremely elaborate and accurate and visually stunning 3D graphics work, put together a demo using, I think the system had 4 Titan X graphics cards in it.
Oh my goodness.
It was running a DX12 demo, and I don't know if there's video of it embedded in there that you can play back, because it's like the screenshots that we're showing are impressive, but in reality, and even captured it on a stream, it's not going to look amazing. But scroll forward like 60 seconds or something like that, a little bit more. It's
ridiculous.
It is ridiculous looking. It truly is, and to be fair, they never call this like a game demo. They're calling this a art and tech demo, right? Yeah. So I don't think we're going to get games that look like this right away, but
At least not for those of us who don't have.
down, right?
I mean, this is they're running this demo on there's $4,000 worth of GPUs in this system, which means there's probably another $1,500 worth of hardware just feeding those GPUs. But it's really, even if you're not anywhere near the high end PC gaming. And even if you're not thinking about, obviously if you're like, I'm just going to sell my car and build a badass gaming machine that'll be outdated in a year, that you'll be able to build for half the price in a year. But, that if you go to that picture right there, one of the things they go into is a concept that was put together by Masahiro Mori 50 years ago, like in 1960, 65, decades ago. And the idea is the uncanny valley. And it's that place where stuff starts to get really realistic, but it's not quite there. And the human reaction is, and creates a sense of the strange or even revulsion in human observers, to quote the NVIDIA blog entry. But it's a big deal. And it's something that they had to kind of bowl their way through in the movie industry, because it got to the point where stuff was really realistic, but it was like you'd watch it and be like, "Oh, it's not human." And that video that you saw, if you're watching the video stream of This Week in Computer Hardware, it's pretty extraordinary. That's
if you're listening to the audio version and you're trying to find it, just Google "Witch Chapter 0 Cry," which is not the most
intuitive
title maybe, but that'll take you to either the NVIDIA blog page where they talk about it, or the Microsoft blog page where they talk about it. And it's the uncanny valley thing is perfectly summarized here, and they're not saying that this gets past it. They say in the blog post that this points in a direction through it, right? And I think that's a fair enough kind of summation of what things look like.
No, it's pretty cool. It's a good read. blogs.nvidia.com/blog/2015/04/30/build-demo/ if you want to find the whole article. I mean, it's one of the interesting things about watching the Pixar movies. As some of the older Pixar movies got re-released on Blu-ray, like one of the ones that was missing in action for a while was Finding Nemo. When they finally did release that, it was an extraordinary experience, having seen the original one in the theater and then realizing how much more amazing, how much the new version was extraordinary, because they had added so much into the rendering engine, right? I apologize, I can't think of the name of the rendering engine they debuted at Disney for I want to say Big Robot 6.
Oh, right.
I've watched this movie like 8 times with my children. Big Hero 6, goodness, it's almost like I have a brain. But it was a pretty incredible rendering engine, and it's funny to realize how much math and science and computing power it takes to really advance what we're looking at on the screen, whether you're talking about a Hollywood movie where they're using huge render farms, to zip out individual frames, right down to the idea of something, like next generation video games. 55,000 core. Oh my goodness. The render farm, that's pretty insane. It's a great Engadget article on this. Disney rendered its new animated film on a 55,000 core supercomputer.
That's a lot.
You think? It's an absolutely gorgeous film. We made the movie on a beta renderer, says Hank Driscoll, technical supervisor for Big Hero 6. It was very much in progress. Boy, talking about betting your ass on your engineers.
You just start over when it crashes, right? Yeah, sure.
Hyperion. There it is.
Okay.
Hyperion represents the studio's greatest and riskiest commitment to research and design and animation technology thus far. And its feasibility wasn't always a sure thing, something Disney's chief technology officer, Andy Hendrickson, underscores when he says, quote, "It's the analog to building a car while you're driving it." And I'm really glad they did. That's a really good article by Joseph Volpe up on Engadget.com. The Hyperion rendering engine is amazing. So is the movie, but
Yeah.
I could talk about that for a while. What I should talk about, we should take a moment to thank Braintree. If you're not familiar with it, this episode is brought to you, of TWiCH is brought to you by Braintree. It's code for easy online payments. If you're building a mobile app and searching for a simple payments tool, a solution, check out Braintree. Braintree V.0 SDK makes it easy to offer multiple mobile payment types. You start accepting PayPal, Apple Pay, Bitcoin, Venmo, cards, and more, all with a single, simple integration. It's really easy. Secure payments. It's simple. It's code you can integrate in minutes. They're basically trying to make life easy for developers. They say, we got you. Don't worry about taking days to integrate your payments. With Braintree, it's done in minutes. If you don't have time, you can give Braintree a call, and they'll even handle the integration for you and walk you through it. The Braintree code supports Android, iOS, and JavaScript clients. It's in 7 languages. The SDKs, .NET, Node.js, Java, Perl, PHP, Python, and Ruby. Quote, elegant code with clear documentation, which is something I think every developer I know pines for. I hear you laughing in the background, but you have your development hell stories. And it's 10 lines of in-app code, which is about as painless, I think, as an integration can get. So you want money in your mobile app, do us a favor, consider Braintree, our sponsor this week on TWiCH. They give you an easy way to accept multiple payment types with one integration. Quick, knowledgeable developer support. If you have any questions, you can start accepting Apple Pay, PayPal, Bitcoin, Venmo, cards, and whatever's next. All with a single integration. For the Braintree V.0 SDK, one small snippet of code, 10 lines, people, and you're all set up in less than 10 minutes. To learn more and for your first $50,000 in transactions fee-free, wouldn't that be nice? Go to BraintreePayments.com/TWiCH. That's BraintreePayments.com/TWiCH. You'll be making your life easier as a developer, and you'll be supporting TWiCH, which means we'll be able to keep bringing the show to you. Something to think about.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness! I'm going to sneeze really quickly. What's the story with?
I'll talk about AMD delaying the Crossfire support for FreeSync. This is actually something that was posted on AMD's own forums. You remember when FreeSync was announced? It did not have support for Crossfire multi-GPU configurations, and they said this is the driver releasing today. Within the next month, we will release another driver that will update for Crossfire support for FreeSync. Well, today is as we record this, is the last day of the month, and a post by AMD in their own support forums. They didn't put out a press release. They didn't make anything very public about it. Just states that after vigorous QA testing, however, it is now clear to us that support for AMD FreeSync monitors on a multi-GPU system is not quite ready for release. And they say they must announce a delay of the AMD Catalyst driver that would offer the support. We will continue to develop and test the solution in accordance with our stringent quality standards, and we'll provide another update when it is ready for release. So they don't give us any updated time frame for release for this driver, just that, hey, as it turns out, we don't have it for you in the month of April, kind of as we promised we would. So that's unfortunate. Also, if you have an R9 295X2 that is a dual GPU graphics card, that's even more frustrating and annoying, right? Maybe you bought a FreeSync monitor that's already out and shipping, thinking, well, they promised me a driver here this month, so I'll just go ahead and get it now that the monitors are out. And you won't be able to take advantage of both of your GPUs and a FreeSync monitor at the same time, which is disappointing. On the other hand, they do support Eyefinity with FreeSync, but not Crossfire. So there must be something inherent in the GPU frame buffer switching that goes back and forth that's kind of complicating things. But if you are an AMD user and you're looking forward to multi-GPU FreeSync support, you're going to have to wait an undisclosed amount of time, I guess. Sorry.
Well, what are you going to do, man?
Well, I'm not going to do anything about it. That's for sure. It's not my job to figure that out.
We shall post no Crossfire support before it's time. Oh my goodness. Please take this hardware from us. PC Per HWC YouTube contest follow-up. Do we have winners? Did people take
No, we don't have winners. Let me tell you what's really frustrating, Patrick. Let me tell you. You host a contest for people. And it's kind of mostly on YouTube. If you leave a comment, you're entered, blah, 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 on a YouTube video. And then you literally contact 15 different people, of which 2 respond.
Oh, my goodness.
One of the 2 that responded lives outside of Canada and North America, which is where the contest was restricted to. So we had 3 pools of prizes to give away. Only one of them ended up giving away. So we had to set this prize up again. So if you're looking for another contest to enter, if you go to pcpro.com and search for the word Gleam, Gleam, or look for the title, Please Take This Hardware From Us, you'll see another way for you to enter to win a couple of pools of prizes that both include a GTX 960 and a Gladius mouse. And then the bigger prize pool also includes an Asus Formula 7 motherboard, a 1 terabyte SSD, a Fantex cooler and Fantex fans, and nice little prize pack there. And all you have to do is you have to subscribe to a YouTube channel and watch a YouTube video. And it's this time it asks for your email address, it asks for your name up front. We will definitely be able to get a hold of people when they are selected as winners, I guess. So please, this stuff is taking up space in an office that's very large that we need to get rid of. So please take this hardware. It's funny, you put that out there, and all of a sudden everybody on Twitter is very generous about alleviating the problem of having too much hardware. But
send it to me, man.
I think it really shows how bad the YouTube messaging system is, because like it seems impossible to me that if 15 people would not reply, or 13 people rather would not reply to a message that says, hey, you won that contest, you entered for free stuff. So
we live, we learn, we grow. What's going to happen in 2 weeks? You're going to get like 13 emails from people who missed the message.
I am waiting for that. That's true. Oh, hey, I saw this. You owe me the hardware, right? I'm like, no, sorry. You took too long.
We tried. Yeah. You had your chance.
I'm sure
I would also like to point out that I am not eligible, nor is anyone in the TWiCH cottage eligible, the brick house, I should say. Nor is Ryan or his family or my family or anyone on that short list. Otherwise, the weeping begins in the peanut gallery. Oh man, it's funny. So I was talking last week about upgrading memory on my system, and it was interesting because it was pretty it was pretty obvious that memory was a major issue on my system. When you open up the resource manager, the first place to start if you're running on Windows is Control-Alt-Delete. Go into the task manager. If you're running the Windows 8 or 10 technical preview, you click on more details and you start getting a bunch of information. And the performance tab is really what you want to look at, because it'll start giving you an idea of the charts for your CPU, memory, disk, networking. And it's interesting to look at, in my case, when I was looking at the memory on that, it was our sub $400 gaming machine, and there was 4 gigabytes of RAM on it. And if you look at the memory stats inside of the task manager, or better yet, the resource monitor, which is the kind of the big brother, the big mama, you get a whole bunch more information in terms of all of the individual kind of processes that are running on your system. And I'm bringing this up because if you're looking at your system, you're thinking gosh, this is slow. If you open up the resource monitor or the performance tab in the task manager, and let's say you're rendering a video file in Handbrake, which is something that's consuming a lot of my Wednesday nights, and your CPU is maxed out at 100%, okay, you need to throw more CPU at this problem. But one of the questions we got on TechThing this week was asking okay, here's a picture of my resource monitor. What's the hard fault, and will more memory help? So hard fault is what Windows used to call page faults. It basically means that your main system, your CPU is Windows asks for a piece of memory. The CPU goes, oh, it's not main system memory, and what used to be called as a page fault, basically, or is now called a hard fault, basically means it has to reach through main system memory, past the caches into the hard drive, and pull that information back, which is a time-consuming task by computing standards. So seriously, if you're looking at systems that aren't performing particularly well, spend some time and get into the resource monitor, get into the performance tab of the task manager. We talked some more about it on TechThing this week, kind of things you can look at and be like, oh, there's my problem. That's what I need to upgrade. Although it was interesting reading online how many people suggest, oh, just upgrade your disk to a SSD and you won't have to get more memory. I personally, at this point, I'm really thinking 8 gigabytes of RAM is starting to really be the minimum I want to run Windows on if I'm going to have more than one thing open, or if I'm running whatever browser with 85 open tabs. But if you're speccing out a system, you can run most games and many applications quite fine if you're doing one thing in 4 gigabytes of RAM. But really do yourself a favor and kick up to 8 gigabytes. Because I ended up I was so enthused by the results. I ended up turning around. I had a 16 gigabyte pack, like 2 8 gigabyte sticks, and I put one stick in that system and another stick in a system I already had 4 gigabytes of memory into. And then I turned around and bought another 16 gigabytes of memory because it was like $110. And suddenly now I have 16 gigs in both systems, and memory is no longer an issue. And one of the nice things about like Windows 8, Windows 10 is it'll cache as many things as possible in your unused main system memory, which means the apps, over time it figures out what you use most frequently and preloads, prefetches those into cache, memory, caches them into main system memory, and the performance is nice. So just want to say that. So
no, it's good. Yeah.
Man, I should probably get this wrapped up because I have to pack up my giant pile of cables in my charging Apple phone and get ready to strap the HoloLens on. I'm very excited.
Yeah, that's good.
We got a pile of questions on that on Twitter that I'm going to try to answer on Tech Thing. It's amazing how many people just want to know, like, does it make me vomit and what's the resolution? Those are the two big ones.
You're watching your Twitter feed to find out.
Yeah, well, you can watch Tech Thing next week to find out. Techthing.com, youtube.com/techthing. Mr. Shrout, who is often found at Ryan Shrout on Twitter, as I am found at Patrick Norton on Twitter. PCPer.com is Ryan's home away from home, at least until the baby's born, in which case it will be his home away from home at his own risk.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Anything you can tease about what's coming up in the next couple of days on PC Per?
What do we have? I finally got in one of those LG 34 by 1440 monitors.
Pretty.
Like the really high resolution curved one. I'm looking forward to I haven't taken it out of the box yet. I'm going to put it on my desk and kind of use it for a little while. I also have that Asus TWiCH in still that I'm trying to wrap my head around. I'm still not sold on giant tablets, right? With the dock, it becomes a laptop. Sure, mostly it has an issue where it doesn't lean back as far as I want it to. But
I noticed that too. When I reviewed that on Tech Thing, it was that, and the Bluetooth keyboard was driving me a little nuts.
Yeah, it's almost great. There's just a couple of little things that I think are going to be enough to ding it out of my portfolio of recommendations.
Right.
What else do we have? Oh, and we have a gaming chair in. I don't know.
Ooh.
We got it looks like a Recaro style racing chair, but it's for gaming. It's for using in front of a computer. What I will say is that reclines back incredibly far, and if you're one of the person who likes to take a nap at work, this is a perfect chair for that. This will be a great chair for that. So we'll figure out something to do with that. I don't know what we're gonna do, but we'll figure something out.
We'll figure something out. Famous last words. Obviously, you should build yourself a full race gaming environment. Or if you want to feel really old school and surrounded by unbelievable hardware that hasn't changed much in the last few years, start building a flight sim system. Man, people get hardcore about flight sims. There's so many awesome things you can do. Oh my goodness. All right, I got to get my HoloLens on. We're going to call that the end of This Week in Computer Hardware. If this is your first trip to This Week in Computer Hardware, do us a favor, go to twit.tv/twitch. That's TWiCH. You'll find all the information on subscribing. You'll find all of our older episodes. This is episode 313, people. Thank you so much for being along for the ride. Subscribe through your favorite podcatcher. Come to the website. And please email us twitch@twit.tv. We love your questions, or as we mentioned earlier, at Patrick Norton, at Ryan Shrout on the Twitters. And that's it for this Week in Computer Hardware. I'm Patrick Norton.
I'm Ryan Shrout.
There's enthusiasm in the press room, people. I love that. None of this bland, morose commentary. People are getting excited. All right, everybody. Have a good night. I'm Patrick Norton.
I'm Ryan Shrout.
We'll see you next week.